Hello and welcome to the Interview on France 24. I'm Andrea Sankey in Paris. Tonight, the new power elite. Defining the industrialists of the 21st century as those who master information and communication. They are the netocrats who compose netocracy. It's a sort of new power structure rising to prominence as capitalism declines. At least this is the thesis of what became a best-selling book in Sweden, and its authors now hope for the same success in France. Philosophers Alexander Bard and Jan Soderquist have just published The Netocrats in French, and they join me now to talk about their unique vision of powerful people in the future. This is the cover, I might mention, of the French edition of Le Netocrat. I gave, my best definition of what you describe in this book. It may not have been that clear, so I'll let the two of you define netocracy, this new power elite you're talking about. Let me start with Alexander.
Well, basically, what we're saying is that the internet is such a profound change of technology that this is the most dramatic technological effect on society we've had since the printing press. And we all know now what the printing press did to society when it arrived 500 years ago. Basically what we call industrial society, the move from the countryside to cities, the creation of the nation state, all of this that really started with the French Revolution was all made possible because of the printing press. And without the printing press, we would never have that kind of society. And our thesis is that the internet is the biggest technological revolution to happen to us socially since the printing press arrived.
Okay, but define then how you rise to this elite status, this elite group of the powerful that you're referring to.
I think you're just being good at using the new technology. You know?
Well, what we're saying is that this is an ecological change, like in a Darwinistic way of speaking. It means new rules. It means that new kinds of talents will be rewarded and old kinds of talents will be punished. So it doesn't pay off to be the old bourgeoisie anymore. New kinds of talents makes you the new kind of elite.
It took one kind of talent to be a good aristocrat and to run your castle and own your land when you lived in the feudal society more than 500 years ago. And obviously the bourgeoisie in the cities of Europe that constructed industrial society were completely different people from the aristocrats. The aristocrats were lazy, they wanted to return to the old, but slowly power moved to the cities and the cities became the center of society, and that was the construction of industrialist society. Our point is that we now need to make new definitions of an upper class and an underclass in society, because the old definitions from Karl Marx, really from the 1830s, have become completely relevant when we look at the world today. And this is why we defined an autocracy, which is the new upper class. We've also defined a new underclass, the people who are left out, who are either not on the internet at all, or when they are on the internet, they don't really communicate using the internet. So they're being left out. We call them the consumptariat. So we're really not just defining an upper class, we're also defining an underclass of this new society, and we're defining the problems that go with the internet.
Okay, so who are they? And I mean literally, give me some names.
The Google founders, for example. Basically people who don't accumulate power by creating a physical item that you go to a shop to buy. We would then say that Bill Gates and Microsoft was probably the last great capitalist of the capitalist era. We're now moving into an economy and we're moving into a society. We're creating things that aren't physical anymore, but that are virtual, becomes the resource of power. And this is why we have this whole new upper class who are using communication and networking as a way of gaining a superior position in society. This whole new rules.
But, I mean, the Google people, for example, some people say that success is virtual. And that's the reason that it will eventually crumble. Because
we're saying they're totally wrong. We're saying that it's going to grow and grow and grow. Google is only the beginning of a whole new trend. We're going to see a lot more virtual power in the world. And eventually the people who have the virtual power are going to take over the whole world. Even the traditional physical economy is going to go their way.
And that's another thing that we say in the book, that the concept of stability is going. You will have a constant change, so those people might be right. I mean, Google might crumble, but then you will have Google .2 or something. So
Super Google or whatever.
Super Google. So, I mean, the old idea of stability, you have to leave that behind you now. you have to realize that change is all you have, and you'll have to not only think again, you'll have to rethink and reinvent yourself all the time.
Okay.
And the old patriarch who would run an army or run a factory or run a traditional university, for example, the old traditional male patriarchal figures that would run society are all gone, because they can no longer control society, because everybody's communicating and interacting. You can no longer sell something to somebody without them communicating back to you. And if they're not allowed to communicate back to you, they won't buy what you're trying to sell to them. So everything in society becomes an interactive process.
So you actually have to redefine communication. Communication used to be sort of a propaganda. Now communication is actually interactivity.
Well, that's bizarre, because some people see it in the entirely opposite way, in that with the rise of the internet, the communication has just been negated. It doesn't exist anymore because you no longer have to talk to anybody when you buy and sell. It's simply on a screen. You press return and your transaction is done. You never have to see a face. You never have to meet.
But that's not what people do. And we are sociologists as much as we are philosophers. We base all our theories on facts and evidence. And we've studied more than anything Korean and Finnish teenage girls. Why Korean and Finnish teenage girls? Because they are the people on the planet Earth at the moment who fastest adopt new technologies and use them socially. So they're the ones who can really teach us how the rest of the world will use new technologies. What they're doing is that, yes, it can look like they look at something on the internet and press a button and click and they made their decision. But before they make that decision, before they book even a hotel room or a flight with a certain airline, they have found out using the internet through their friends, using Facebook and other media, they found out which kind of flight they should fly, which flight is the best, which time should they arrive, which hotel should they stay in, which hotels are the best, which are the worst in a specific city. We don't make decisions anymore just out of nowhere. We do communicate with other people before we make any decisions whatsoever, and that's exactly why being able to communicate, the whole idea of branding is a form of communication. Why communicating is so important.
Also, I mean, corporate scandal, it doesn't go away like it used to anymore, because it will live forever in the blogosphere until the company actually responds and makes some comment or make amends and promise to better itself. So it's you have to listen to your consumers in a whole new way.
Okay, and explain for me how you factor the decline of capitalism into all this.
Well, capitalism really comes from the Latin word caput, meaning head. So it's the idea that society is a head that controls a body. It was the idea philosophically from Descartes onwards, but it was also the idea of the nation state. Paris is a city, and Paris controls the surrounding countryside, which it calls France, for example. That's the old idea of the nation state. Everything in industrial society was organized the same way. Capitalism in the sense of the head controlling the body, not really thinking in terms of economy, but in thinking in terms of the original meaning of the word capitalism. And we define capitalism as an historic period for about 500 years. It's now coming to its end, and it's being replaced by an interactive age. In the age of interactivity, all communication will be interactive. If it isn't interactive, it will not result in a process, for example, of purchase. And that's exactly why everything, including the economy, will be bent to the rules of interactivity.
But you believe all this applies globally, while some of your critics would actually say you're only really describing, a micro community here for the webheads.
We've been traveling so much. We've been studying Asia. We've been to Africa. We've been to Latin America. And this goes for all those places. I mean, look at how the Philippines ousted the corrupt president in 2001, Joseph Estrada.
Using mobile phones.
Using mobile phones.
Yeah.
I mean, interactivity rules.
Or
really.
look at our book. I mean, the book has now been translated to French, and we love that because we love French philosophy. So being a philosopher in France was always our idea. But this is the 13th translation. And the translations in Portuguese and Hindu and even in Arabic all came before the French translation. Why are we so popular as philosophers in countries like South Africa, Brazil, and India, if not because we're speaking about them and their reality? And one of the real achievements of this book is actually that we killed the myth of the third world. There never was any third world. And if there was anything that we could call the last remnant of Western racism, it really was the idea that there was a third world that was different from the first world. The netocracy and the consummation cut straight through the entire global society. We have consumptarians in France, we have netocrats in France, but we also have consumptarians and netocrats in India and everywhere around the world. So the class divisions we're defining actually cut through every country in the world, not one part of the world against another.
And if you go to, for example, Johannesburg in South Africa, even the poorest people in the shanty towns, they have a cell phone no matter how poor they are. And the politicians in South Africa, make no mistake about that, they know that the cell phone is a weapon. So they have to watch out.
So more and more we're seeing kind of the playing field being leveled.
Yes.
Yes, we are. And of course, the whole world will be democratic eventually, even China and Iran. And if you look at China, for example, interesting enough, even the politicians and the members of the Communist Party are becoming aware that this is something they can't stop. It's just a question of when and at what steps should China be democratic? And because the internet is there simply. Mm-hmm. And because the internet exists there, everything will be exposed. And in a society where everything is exposed, you eventually have to have a democracy.
Interesting. One last question quickly. You talk about the value and the power of communication in an autocracy, and that's what really determines who makes up this new power elite. Yet you put down the importance of things like Facebook and MySpace, that everyone says this, this new internet networking system is what's taken over the world.
Well, we're just in the beginning of this development. And Facebook works fine for us now, but eventually I think that you will not need 10,000 friends because you cannot handle 10,000 friends on Facebook. So people will just don't have the time to do that.
And we're also discussing how nasty the internet will be. We're not describing a new paradise in any way. We're not naive.
This is really important.
I think the real philosophical achievement of this book when it came out in 2000 was to be identified the new underclass of the internet, which nobody had wanted to talk about before. And the new underclass is also on the internet. It's people who are logged on, but they can't use it to communicate and get power. They only use it for playing video games or something like that, which doesn't really communicate anything, doesn't give them any power. And that's what's important to define here. And that's why, for example, communities like Facebook and MySpace that let everybody in will have a problem eventually, because actually the really powerful communities on the internet will be closed and gated.
Okay, Alexander Bard and Jan Soderquist. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of the interview. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Very, very interesting stuff.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. Thanks to our viewers as well. That's all for tonight. Bonsoir.